Logan Hayes stood at the edge of the fighting floor, with motor oil still dark under his fingernails. His shirt worn thin at the collar, when the laughter broke from the VIP section like a wave crashing over shallow water. Victoria Hale leaned toward the woman beside her, her voice cool and perfectly audible above the ambient noise of the crowd. "He can't take one hit." The words landed like a verdict. The people nearby laughed not loudly, but the way people laugh when they believe they're safe. When they're certain no one important is listening. Dominic Cruz, the professional fighter who had been pacing the floor with the lazy confidence of a man who had never once doubted himself, turned and looked Logan over with the particular contempt reserved for things beneath consideration. He rolled his neck. He cracked his knuckles. Logan said nothing. He glanced just once, briefly toward the rope barrier at the far edge of the floor, where a 6-year-old boy with watchful eyes stood gripping the rope with both hands, staring back at his father. 2 seconds later, it was finished. No one in that room fully understood what they had witnessed, not until Dominic Cruz lay motionless on the polished floor, and the silence swallowed every sound the building had ever held. The story that followed the real story, the one that mattered, began much earlier than that night, and it was quieter, and harder, and far more worth knowing. One moment changed everything, but the truth behind it left them more silent than the fight ever could. Stay until the end. Boston does not pause for anyone. It moves the way old cities move, with the indifferent momentum of a place that has already decided what it is, what it values, and who belongs inside its layers. The financial towers reflected clouds in the morning, and the lunch crowds moved in practiced formations along the sidewalks of the Back Bay, and the money that pooled in certain rooms of certain buildings had a particular quality of silence, the silence of things that do not need to announce themselves. But if you drove 20 minutes from those towers and turned down a narrow street that ran between a laundromat and a hardware supply warehouse, you would find a different kind of Boston entirely. A garage with a hand-lettered sign, a hydraulic lift that groaned under heavy vehicles, a radio playing classic rock at the volume of a conversation, and a man who worked with the focused patience of someone who had learned, a long time ago, that most problems yielded to steady attention. Logan Hayes was 32 years old and had the build of someone who had once been trained for serious physical work and had never entirely stopped. He was not large in a way that drew attention. He was simply solid, the kind of solid that comes from years of carrying weight, not from hours in a gym. His forearms carried old scars in thin lines that had faded to silver, and his hands were permanently rough in the creases despite how thoroughly he scrubbed them each night before picking up his son. He spoke infrequently at work. He answered questions with the minimum number of words the situation required. The 2 other mechanics who worked at the garage liked him without entirely knowing why they sensed, in the vague way people sense such things, that Logan Hayes had a quality of reliability that ran deeper than punctuality or skill. He was the kind of man you wanted nearby when something went wrong, though none of them could have explained exactly why they felt that way. He had moved to Boston 3 years earlier, after the death of his wife Claire, from a brain aneurysm that gave no warning and no chance. Ethan had been 3 years old. Logan had packed what mattered, said the necessary goodbyes to the people in Virginia who had known a different version of him, and driven north with his son asleep in the back seat. He had found the garage through a former colleague who asked no questions about his background, hired him on the strength of a 2-minute conversation, and paid him a wage that was honest if not generous. Logan had found a 2-bedroom apartment 8 blocks away and enrolled Ethan in the public school down the street, and that had been, more or less, the shape of his life. Ethan Hayes, at 6 years old, was small and serious, and observed the world with the quiet attentiveness of a child who has learned that the most interesting information is usually not the loudest. He did not speak much in large groups, but alone with his father he talked freely about the birds he had seen on the walk to school, about the way the clouds over the harbor looked different than the clouds over the highway, about a boy in his class who had told him his father's garage was dirty. Logan had listened to that last part without changing his expression and then said, very simply, that most work worth doing involved getting dirty at some point, and that the boy's father was welcome to come fix his own transmission. Ethan had found this satisfying. He had nodded as though a correct equation had been completed, and gone back to his drawing. There was one thing people who knew Logan only casually sometimes noticed and then forgot: a narrow scar that ran along the outside edge of his right hand, from the base of the little finger to the wrist. It was not dramatic. It did not look like a wound from a fight. It looked like the kind of mark left by something precise, a deliberate cut, or a training accident of a specific type. If anyone had asked him about it, he would have said it was old. He would not have said more than that. No one had asked in 3 years. The contract came through on a Tuesday. The garage owner, a heavyset man named Frank, who had a talent for acquiring unusual clients through improbable connections, told Logan that a company called Hale Capital was sending over 2 vehicles for servicing a black sedan and an SUV, both requiring full inspections before a charity event on Friday evening. The company representative had requested that the vehicles be delivered directly to the event venue, a converted waterfront exhibition hall called Meridian Pier, by 6:30 in the evening. Frank offered Logan overtime to handle the delivery personally, since the other 2 mechanics had prior commitments, and Logan's steadiness made him the obvious choice for anything involving expensive vehicles and important clients. Logan had accepted without hesitation, then spent the next 3 minutes working through the logistics of what to do with Ethan. His usual arrangement, a neighbor named Mrs. Calloway who watched Ethan on late evenings, fell apart when he called and got no answer. He tried 2 other options from the short list he kept in the notes on his phone. Both were unavailable. He stared at the ceiling of the garage for a moment, then called the school to confirm Ethan's after-school care timing, worked out that if he picked Ethan up at 5 and drove directly to the venue, he would arrive well within the window, and concluded that his son would simply come along for the delivery. It would be quick. In and out. Ethan, told about the plan when Logan picked him up that afternoon, had accepted it with the philosophical equanimity of a child who has learned that plans are provisional and adaptation is normal. He buckled himself into the passenger seat of the old truck Logan drove when not behind the wheel of a client vehicle and asked whether there would be food at the event. Logan told him he didn't know. Ethan said that was fine. He looked out the window at the harbor as they drove and was quiet in the particular way that meant he was thinking about something and would eventually ask about it. He did not ask on the drive over. He waited. Meridian Pier was not what Logan had expected, though he had not spent much time forming expectations. He had been to event venues in his previous life, had walked through spaces like this in a different context, under different circumstances, in a different version of himself, and he recognized the machinery of organized wealth, the valets moving smoothly around expensive cars, the lighting design that made everything look intentional, the women in evening wear who moved with the practiced ease of people who had attended many such evenings. A sign near the main entrance read, Hale Capital Charity Gala Fight Night for Foundation. Beneath that, smaller, proceeds benefit the Children's Education Initiative. He parked the vehicles in the designated area, confirmed the handoff with a facilities manager who barely looked at him, and was preparing to leave when Ethan, standing beside him on the walkway, tugged his sleeve and pointed toward the large glass doors that opened onto the main hall. Through the glass, they could see the interior. The fighting floor at the center, surrounded by tiered seating, the ring lights already blazing. A professional fighter in red training shorts was moving through what appeared to be a demonstration shadowboxing for the assembled guests, who watched from their seats and from standing clusters along the outer perimeter. Ethan said, very quietly, "Can we watch for a minute?" Logan looked at his son. He looked at the watch on his wrist, an old thing, mechanical, that had belonged to Claire's father. He had nothing else scheduled for the evening. Ethan had, in the way of children, asked with the exact tone that made refusal feel like an unnecessary subtraction from the world. They went inside. The interior of Meridian Pier on that Friday evening held approximately 300 people, most of them drawn from the upper registers of Boston's financial and corporate community. The exhibition floor had been transformed. Round tables with white linens occupied one half of the space, while the fighting area, a marked square of impact-resistant flooring, 12 feet across, defined by 4 low rope barriers, occupied the other. A raised platform at the north end served as the MC's position, and from that platform, a man named Carter Mills was managing the evening's pacing with the practiced warmth of someone whose professional value lay in making crowds feel engaged without requiring them to think too hard. Logan and Ethan found a space along the outer wall, away from the tables, in the standing area that had been left open for guests who preferred to observe from a distance. Logan was aware. In the peripheral way, he was always aware of such things. Of the contrast his clothing made in this room. Work pants. A gray shirt that had been clean when he put it on that morning. Steel-toed boots. He did not experience this contrast as embarrassment. He experienced it as information. Ethan stood close to the rope barrier at the edge of the standing area, his attention fully fixed on the fighter in the center of the floor. Dominic Cruz, the name was on the event materials posted near the entrance, along with a photograph that had been taken professionally, in the way athlete photographs are taken, was not merely shadowboxing anymore. He had transitioned into a demonstration of power and speed that was legitimately impressive to anyone who understood what they were watching. He was 35, with the structured musculature of a career fighter, and he moved with the fluid economy of someone who had spent more hours in training than most people had spent at their primary occupation. His combinations were fast. His footwork was precise. The crowd appreciated it, applauding at the punctuations in his movement. From where Logan stood, the VIP section was directly to his right, a cluster of high-top tables separated from the general standing area by a velvet rope that existed more as a symbol than a barrier. He had not chosen to stand near it deliberately. He had simply followed Ethan to the closest open spot at the rope barrier, and the VIP section happened to be adjacent. He was not looking at the people there. He was watching his son watch the fighter. Victoria Hale was 28 years old and had been running Hale Capital, a mid-sized private equity firm that her father had built, and she had taken over at 25 when he suffered a stroke for 3 years. She was not a person who wasted time. She had a quality of directed attention that could read, to people who encountered it unprepared, as coldness. Though the people who worked most closely with her understood it as something closer to efficiency, she had so thoroughly eliminated the habit of performing interest. She did not feel that her interest, when it appeared, was unambiguous. She was standing at the edge of the VIP section with a glass of sparkling water in her hand, watching the demonstration with the composed attention she brought to most things, when her assistant Sophia Lane leaned close and said something quiet that made her smile. She did not register Logan at first. He was, to her peripheral vision, simply one more figure in the standing area, a man watching the demonstration from a respectable distance, a child beside him gripping the rope. She had not looked at him closely when she noticed him at all. Carter Mills, managing the crowd energy from the platform, had a showman's instinct for the moment when a room needed escalation. He had been building toward it for the last few minutes, narrating Cruz's movements, asking the crowd rhetorical questions, warming up what he called the interactive portion of the evening. He raised the microphone and said, with practiced bonhomie, "Now who in this room thinks they've got what it takes to step onto the floor with our champion? Come on. Anyone. Don't be shy. This is for charity." The crowd laughed. A few people made theatrical gestures of reluctance. Mills scanned the room with the MC's practiced eye for drama and landed, with the instinct of someone who has learned to identify contrast, on the man standing at the edge of the standing area, in work clothes. He did not know who Logan was. He simply saw the most visually incongruous figure in the room. "How about you, my friend?" Mills said, pointing. The gentleman in the gray shirt. The nearest people turned and looked. Someone in the VIP section laughed, not at anything specific, simply at the image. Several people took out their phones. The crowd had the light, comfortable cruelty of groups that have been made to feel safe together, where no one individual is responsible for the collective reaction. Logan did not move. He looked at the MC, then at the fighter, with an expression that gave away nothing. It was in that moment in the brief window, when the crowd's laughter was still subsiding, that Victoria Hale looked at Logan Hayes for the first time, with something approaching actual attention. She saw the work clothes. She saw the stillness. She saw the child beside him tighten his grip on the rope barrier. And she said, in a voice